If you have a fear of holes, you might want to look away for just a few seconds, because I finally have a cheese grater computer. But it's a Dell. I must say this design is quite interesting. This color of the plastic case brings Apple's Space Gray into mind, but this computer came out way before Apple invented a marketing term for that shade of gray. It's also pretty big. You can see it compared to my HP Compact Micro Tower over here. This is a Dell PowerEdge 840 with an Intel Xeon CPU. We'll leave it at that for now. And that's the Roman numeral 2 to indicate that this is the second revision of this computer. The first one is from 2006. This one is from 2008, but it still has some components from 2006. PowerEdge computers are designed for server use, not for normal computing. On the front it has a DVD-RW drive, which I installed myself. It originally had a plain CD drive, no DVD or burner. The spot for another 5¼ inch drive, the spot for a 3½ inch drive, which could be a floppy drive or a tape backup drive, 2 USB 2.0 ports, power button, power indicator, hard drive indicator, key lock to lock the case, and a status light. On the back we've got the power supply, PS2 keyboard and mouse ports, serial port, VGA port, 2 more USB ports and gigabit Ethernet. Also 5 expansion slots, and Dell branded keys, which are used for the key lock we saw at the front. To open up this computer we first have to take off the front panel by sliding this switch. When the case is locked, the switch cannot be moved. We can see the lock mechanism from the other side. When it's set to the lock position, this metal piece will slide up and prevent the switch from being moved. When the front panel is off, we get an additional 4 status lights. The additional status lights are marked A, B, C, and D. And by unscrewing these 3 screws, the whole drive cage can come out, after unplugging the drives from inside, of course. And there's a switch that detects if the front panel was removed. Then, to remove the side panel, we unscrew this thumb screw and slide the case towards the front, not towards the back like most computers. So here are the insides of this big Dell tower. There's the power supply. I'm not sure about the wattage yet, but I'm sure it's pretty beefy. There's a huge cooling baffle for the CPU fan, a case fan over here, 2 SATA hard drives, and the SATA optical drive I installed myself. There was an IDE optical drive in here before. There's the IDE connector and floppy or tape backup drive connector. They look similar, but they are different. And there are 4 RAM slots. It takes some special DDR2 RAM with error correction, much like my IBM IntelliStation, but at a higher clock frequency. So I could put these RAM sticks in my IntelliStation and they would work, but I'm not sure if the lower speed ones from the IntelliStation would work here. I haven't tried it. This computer has 2 GB of RAM and can be upgraded up to 8. This computer is a bit dirty inside, but not that horrible. The expansion slots are regular PCI, and those 2 slots above it are PCI-X, which are backwards compatible with regular PCI, but not PCI Express. There's also a PCI Express x1 slot, and a PCI Express x8 slot, which has a RAID controller card. This motherboard has 4 SATA slots integrated into the motherboard. But if we want to use RAID, we have to use this card that's included. This is the Dell PERC, and it's missing some cables for a reason. This computer originally came with 3 of these Seagate Barracuda ES hard drives. However, you can see I removed one of them because it was dead. And I even took it apart to see what it's like inside. And this huge scratch in the middle of the platters was there already. No wonder it wasn't working. All 3 of these drives are 750 GB, 7200 RPM. The other drives are still working, but I wouldn't trust them obviously. The 3 drives were set up as RAID 5, so even though one drive had died, the data was still recoverable because the 2 drives are still working. Although there was nothing of interest, so I just wiped the drives. This computer has a license for Windows Server Standard 2003 R2, which is based on Windows XP. It only has one custom background picture. However, that software is quite outdated today. This computer would actually still make a decent home server with a new Linux distribution and some newer, more reliable drives. However, another problem with server computers is that they make a lot of noise. We'll hear that later. It's normal for servers to make so much noise, because they're not designed to be quiet, they're designed to be reliable. Keep in mind, servers are supposed to run 24/7 for years, maybe reboot sometimes, but rarely shut off. Not to mention its power consumption, I'm pretty sure this thing uses up a lot of power. So let's try some unconventional things, like trying to use this computer as a normal one, which you're not supposed to do. This computer was thrown out, and I ended up with it, so let's do something with it. To try something special, I've gathered here 4 solid-state drives. I've connected them to this breakout cable that plugs into the RAID controller card, and I'm gonna set them up as RAID 0. That means that each drive is joined together to form one big drive, and data is distributed across all 4 of them. So that means read and write speed will be quadrupled, at least in theory. Also, I'm pretty sure this RAID controller doesn't support SSD trim, but for this temporary setup, these drives should do fine. So we've also got this extender that plugs into this power connector on the power supply to power the drives. And I already mentioned the data connector that goes to the RAID controller. And these 4 SATA power connectors are the only SATA power connectors this power supply has. So I normally can't power the optical drive, which is also SATA in this case. So I got this cheap Molex to SATA power adapter, which, yes, they are dangerous, but it's a temporary solution as well. And actually, in this case, I'm installing Windows from a USB drive, not a CD or DVD, so I can unplug it right now, and it won't have any risk of burning. So one more proof, this is just a temporary setup. I just shoved the 4 SSDs in here, connected them to the SATA power connector. Now I'm going to connect the data connector. This data cable was made by Amphenol, which sounds like a name of a medicine to me, but apparently it's a brand of cables and other stuff. And this cable was made on November 5th, 2007. It plugs in here. And this connector, I don't know if it's for 4 more drives or a different type of drives. So everything inside should be connected now. Oh, and the side panel also has this information sticker. Printed in the UK. Now I'm gonna plug that computer in without pressing the power button, and you'll see what happens. The power light starts blinking and the fan starts running. That's the power supply fan. The computer is not on yet, and also the status light starts blinking because the front panel is off. If we reinstall it, give it a few seconds and it should stop blinking. There it is. Let's turn it on now and you'll hear what kind of noise it makes. And it's gonna stay like that until it turns off. But of course, the power supply fan keeps running even after it's turned off. You have to unplug the machine to stop that. But let's also see what happens when we turn it on, not just hear it. We get the BIOS screen. Let's press F2 to go to the setup. This originally had BIOS revision A05. I updated it to A06, which is the latest one for this computer. Now it's initializing the RAID controller. No logical drives because I haven't set it up with these 4 SSDs yet. And I'm not sure what the error is, but we wanted to go to the setup anyway, so we'll press F2. And there's the PowerEdge 840 BIOS setup. So time, date, no diskette drive, there's the RAM, video memory, This computer has ATI ES1000 integrated graphics, which are the bare minimum basically, just to get you a video output. It doesn't support 3D acceleration at all. System memory testing enabled, but we'll disable it so the startup will be faster. OS install mode just serves to limit the RAM to 256 megabytes, in case you're installing some oddball operating system that misbehaves when there's more RAM than that, but in my case showing the full 2 gigs is fine. CPU information, some settings there. There are no IDE drives. There was a SATA drive, but it's unplugged now. I could turn it off, but just in case I'm plugging it in again, I'm gonna leave that to auto. Nothing in the other ports. Boot sequence, just this embedded MBA, I don't remember what that stands for. USB flash drive emulation type. Well, we'll leave it at auto. Integrated devices. SATA controller can only be off or ATA mode, so no AHCI mode, even though it's probably not relevant when we're using the RAID card. IRQ assignments. Something for the serial port, I think. System security. You can even disable the power button. Keyboard unlock, report keyboard errors, asset tag. That doesn't seem to do anything. And that's it for the BIOS setup. So I haven't made any changes, so we can discard. And now it's gonna try to do network boot, but I haven't connected it to my network. We'll check out the other included settings. So we'll restart. And when you restart, it skips the memory test, but after turning it off in the BIOS, it's gonna skip it all the time, even if you shut down or unplug it. Anyway, I pressed Ctrl S to enter the Broadcom Net Extreme Ethernet settings, the same kind of Ethernet many other computers of the era had, and there you can just see what's there. We'll check out the RAID controller settings later. There are some other settings in a moment. Control E. I'm not sure what IPMI is, but there are its settings. And there's one more thing. PXE boot, that's just booting from the network. Utility mode is some diagnostic stuff, but I think it runs from the hard drive, so I don't have those utilities. However, you can still download them from the Dell website and make a boot disk, which I actually tried while I was troubleshooting some stuff, and it didn't show any errors. It's a little utility, both text-based and graphical-based. So we'll reboot one more time, giving it the 3-finger salute as always. And this time enter the RAID controller settings, which I believe is Control R, yes. I hold down those keys until it starts beeping, so that way I know it's recognized my command. But I won't enter those settings until it's done initializing. And here we are. This is the Dell PERC 5i. So there's no configuration present. Let's make one. Press F2, create new virtual disk, and here can be set up a few different ways. RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 5, and RAID 10. There are plenty of videos, web pages, and even books about RAIDs. So I won't explain everything, but for this video we're gonna choose RAID 0, which is not reliable because if any of these drives fail, everything is lost, because a little bit of everything is stored on every drive. And as you can see, the drives are all different sizes. To use all of them equally, it has to take the smallest size. So we're gonna select all 4 of them, and the total size is gonna be around 450 gigabytes. We don't have to give it a name, we'll leave the default settings. Press OK, and now it says that we have to initialize the logical drive. So we press F2 to access the operations again, and do the fast initialization. We'll continue. And there it's done. Now we have 4 SSDs in RAID 0. Physical disks, we've seen them. We've allocated all possible space. The additional space on the larger drives is wasted, but whatever. Normally you're supposed to use RAID with identical drives. We'll press Ctrl N to access the next page. And here we see some more details about each drive. So that's my Crucial drive, Kingston, Western Digital, and Micron. And some information about the controller. I also upgraded the firmware on it. Initially it had 5.1 I think, and I upgraded it to 5.2. I can't enable the alarm, it skips over that option. But anyway, now it's set up so we can press escape to exit. And that's the only thing we can do now, reboot again. But before we reboot, I'm gonna connect a USB drive to install an operating system. This computer does not have a boot menu. So how are we gonna boot from USB? We have to enter the setup again. And as you can see, there's one logical drive now. That's the RAID we set up. But anyway, if we want to boot from USB, we have to go back to the BIOS setup. And now there should be an additional option. Boot sequence. MBA, I believe it stands for multi-boot agent, so that's network boot. So we'll move that down. And there's the additional option, hard disk drive sequence. Because now it detects the USB flash drive. When you remove the USB drive and add it back, this option always goes back to the bottom. So if you want to boot from USB, you always have to plug in the USB drive first, then turn on the computer, then go to the BIOS setup and move this option to the top. So now it's going to boot to the USB drive first. We can save and exit. Did I turn on memory test again? Not sure why the BIOS is taking a bit longer now. Okay, I'm afraid it's not recognizing my USB drive. It should show a boot screen. Never mind, it actually booted up. It just took a really long time, about 15 minutes. So this is Windows 10, the latest version, 22H2. Let's see if we can install it. We're just gonna try it, so no product key. Let's try Windows 10 for workstations, why not? Okay, now it's installing. And before going online with it, we'll try to update the drivers. Let's eject the USB flash drive. And plug in my USB hard drive, which has a driver pack. Very few drivers to update. And it just crashed. It was an error about the ATI driver. Those drivers are not going to be useful at all, because this graphics chip doesn't support 3D acceleration or anything. I'm pretty sure just leaving it with the Microsoft Basic default video driver won't change anything. I mean, once the server is set up, you wouldn't look at the screen. It would run headless, as they say. That's why the graphics on this computer are so bad. And there are no exclamation marks. Only basic display adapter, but again, I'm pretty sure having the driver installed in this computer wouldn't improve anything. Same for the network driver, where is it? The Broadcom one, and the LSI Mega RAID. I mean, it recognized the Dell PERC, so I don't think we need to update the drivers more than this. So here it is, Windows 10 on this Dell PowerEdge. See, the highest resolution we can set is 1280 by 1024. Here it is, Intel Xeon 3060 at 2.4 GHz, dual core, with 2 gigs of RAM, and the newest Windows 10 22H2. Now let's measure how long it takes for Windows 10 to start up on this computer with this RAID setup. So I'll press escape and start counting. Okay, that's not so bad, but you'd think 4 SSDs at once would be a little faster than this. Let's open Task Manager to see what's going on. I haven't even connected it to the internet yet, and it's doing something with Skype. So there's the CPU, 2 2 cores, 2 threads. Right now it's using 1.2 gigs of memory, and it's recognizing the RAID setup as a regular hard drive. Okay, now it's not doing much in the background. To test this RAID speed, we'll use Crystal Disk Mark. I'll just leave it at the default setting. It's gonna test 1 GB of data 5 times. So let's go. And there we have it. I've also plugged in the Ethernet cable. I'm pretty sure this 15-year-old RAID controller only supports SATA 1 speed. So looking this up online, I know it's big, but it's good enough for now. SATA 1 speed uses 150 megabytes per second. We'll assume these SSDs can reach this speed, which they obviously can. If we have them in RAID 0, the speed should be quadrupled, so 150 times 4 is 600, which is close to the speed we got here, so that's okay. However, newer computers use SATA 3, which also goes at around 600 megabits per second. So there's one more proof that this RAID setup is not very useful. I just wanted to try it. Another thing is that it has no sound card. So if you want sound, you have to install a sound card separately, either through PCI or through USB. Anyway, now that we're online, I'm trying to update Edge, and we'll see if we can do some real web browsing. Oh no, it is up to date, version 108. So let's just go to YouTube. The usual test video I use. And there's not going to be any sound because I don't have a sound card, but we'll see. Okay, it seems pretty smooth, but not completely. It's definitely dropping some frames. This is at 720p, 60 frames per second. So let's try 480p, 30 frames per second. Still dropping some frames, I'm afraid. But for the graphics in this computer, we can't really complain. Also, it's probably doing stuff in the background now that it's online. Maybe not yet. Yeah, it's not dropping a lot of frames at 480p, but it definitely is dropping some. Pretty sure it found updates already. Oh no, it didn't. So there we have it. What else can I show on this computer? The BIOS is from August 19th, 2008. It recognizes the platform as Enterprise Server. Usually on normal computers it says something like desktop or mobile. There's no TPM in this computer. And that's about it. The best thing to do with a computer like this is install a server operating system, but again, I don't want to leave it running all the time, making so much noise and using up so much power, so I'll reconnect the 2 original hard drives that are still working and set them up as RAID 1, which means both drives will have the same contents. Read speed will be doubled because it can read from both drives at the same time, but write speed will be just like one drive because it has to write the data twice on 2 disks. However, if all but one drive fail, the data will still be recoverable because each drive has the same amount of data. Maybe I'll install something like Ubuntu Server, but I'll probably just leave it blank and put this computer away. I could sell it, but it's not worth much these days. I'm running out of space of the SD card of my phone, so I think it's a good time to end this video. Thank you for watching.